Hi, my name is Doug Vossen. Over the last 2.5 years, I've been doing a podcast called DVRT. During that time, I've been fortunate enough to have a few conversations with my friend Mark in the Philippines. We discussed the drug war, as well as the martial law that they're currently experiencing there. After those conversations, I knew I needed to investigate this on my own in person. I hope you guys can get some good information out of this and enjoy it. This is Vossen Media. If you're a Westerner, you've probably seen some things about the Philippines on the news recently. The Philippines elected a hardliner in 2016 named Rodrigo Duterte, who, much like this guy, makes statements designed to appeal to his constituents' visceral emotions rather than logical minds.
Get out of my city if you're doing drugs or other crimes. Because if you don't, I'll kill you.
But if you want me to be an animal, sana rin ako dyan. Pareho lang tayo. I mean, I can dish out more than what you can 50 times over. Kainin pa kita sa harap ko. Bigyan mo lang ako suka pati asin. I'll eat you. Totoo. Pagalitin mo ako, bigyan mo ako yung terorista. Bigyan mo ako asin pati suka. Kakainin ko yung atay niya.
Most of this rhetoric surrounds a drug war, as well as a separate issue in martial law that was declared on the entire southern island of Mindanao because of an Islamic State uprising.
My campaign against drugs will not stop until the last pusher and the last drug lord are...
Western media has been fixated on alleged extrajudicial killings that are happening as a result of this hardline approach to the drug war. They're also concerned with martial law because when martial law was declared during the administration of President Ferdinand Marcos, it was widely viewed as an attempt to consolidate power and take advantage of the population.
My countrymen, as of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
You gave an interview and you said that the martial law declaration will not be any different from the martial law declared by former President Marcos. How so, sir, considering that that martial law was hounded by allegations of torture and abuse?
Martial law of Mr. Marcos was very good. If I think that the ISIS has already taken foothold also in Luzon, and terrorism is not really far behind, I might declare martial law throughout the country.
Some people directly affected by this approach to the drug war, combined with the possibility of full-blown martial law looming, are understandably wary. Some claim police officers will put on plain clothes and some sort of a mask to hide their identity, maybe a motorcycle helmet, and simply shoot people dead without due process. The police say that it's vigilante justice or just rival drug gangs fighting each other. Either way, they say that they're focused on eliminating all of it. To be honest, my gut tells me that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Why don't we apply the concepts of network building, intelligence-driven operations, and intellectual curiosity and combine them into something we can all hopefully learn from? After hearing so much about the state of affairs in the Philippines, it was time to go there and figure out what was going on for myself. I just wanted to take a snapshot of reality as it is on the ground, versus the way the mainstream media likes to sensationalize things, take them out of context, and present them in a way that may not be entirely accurate. Before we talk about how things are at the time of filming, it's important to understand some things about this country's long history. For a country so important to the US and the rest of Asia, the average American doesn't know a whole hell of a lot about it. This is Fred. He knows a ton about Philippine history and current events. I talked to him for over an hour.
The Philippines was discovered, quote-unquote, by Magellan in 1521 and ruled over us, over the Philippines, as a colony for almost 400 years. We were under the yoke of the Spanish regime.
Yes.
And this is, 16th century.
The Philippine Islands are located in Southeast Asia in a strategic location between China, Japan, and the Koreas, as well as the rest of Southeast Asia. It was colonized by the Spanish in the 1500s until a bloody revolt led by General Emilio Aguinaldo in 1896. Aguinaldo unofficially allied with the United States during this time because they had a common enemy in Spain. The U.S. was also fighting the Spanish in the Spanish-American War and had just trashed their entire navy in the Battle of Manila Bay. I actually went to Aguinaldo's home in a city called Cavite, which is now both a memorial for his grave as well as a museum. It's a patriotic spot for Filipino people. When we got there, an elderly gentleman began speaking to us. He was a museum volunteer who not only knew the ins and outs of the history behind everything, but also knew all of the little details of Aguinaldo's house. There were secret passages to enter and leave meetings quickly, other places to have discreet meetings, a guard tower, and even a bomb shelter with a tunnel that led to a cathedral a few hundred meters away. He gave us a whole private tour that other tourists didn't get without us even having asked. It was a pretty cool experience. So if you ever need to escape from your personal Hyrule Castle basement in the middle of the night to get to the church like Princess Zelda in A Link to the Past, you can. Although the tunnel is about as small as the one Bishop had to climb through to remotely pilot the dropship down from the Sulaco.
See you soon. Watch your fingers.
Not a very pleasant experience, although I imagine it'd be better than getting shelled in your house. Philippine independence was declared on June 12, 1898. However, nobody else in the world gave a shit, thus beginning the Philippine-American War. The Philippine-American War, or as it's referred to on the back of my old battalion's t-shirts, the Philippine Insurrection, was also long and bloody. It ended with the U.S. maintaining control of the Philippines, with the exception of a brief Japanese occupation during World War II. The Philippines did not become an internationally recognized independent state until 1946.
And the Japanese soldiers, when they came over, were also as atrocious, or more atrocious than the Spaniards when they were here. So, no way they stood up until the Americans came back and liberated the Philippines. And some of the Filipinos who are naive said, "Oh, Savior, welcome, G.I. Joe, Victory Joe, give me chocolate."
One last piece of historical information that will provide additional context for this story is about a man named Ferdinand Marcos, who I briefly mentioned earlier. He was the president of the Philippines from 1965 to 1986, and he placed the Philippines under martial law in 1972, officially in response to a communist insurgency. However, he was notoriously corrupt and revamped the constitution, silenced the media, and used unethical means as well as violence to negate the influence of his political rivals. So, suffice to say that the Philippines is a wonderfully complex nation that is not only a melting pot of indigenous cultures from all over Southeast Asia, but also a melting pot of cultures ranging from local Philippine culture
I just had beef testicles, nice,
to a palpable Spanish influence to the more in-your-face American influence. Here are some examples. The Spanish brought over brandy, Catholicism, and lechon. The Americans not only brought over the fork and knife, but also a public school system, a legal system, and many standards and practices regarding trade. There is much more that you can attribute to both, but these are just a few surface-level observations. The religious breakdown of the country is roughly 80% Catholic, 13% miscellaneous flavors of Christianity, and 6% Muslims, who are most concentrated on the southern island of Mindanao, with the remainder falling into traditional local beliefs and customs or minority religions not heavily represented in the country. One other interesting thing, in the 1930s, the Philippines had something called the Open Door Policy, in which 1,200 Jews fleeing the Holocaust were allowed to restart their lives in the Philippines. To this day, Israel and the Philippines still have positive diplomatic ties, and neither country requires the other to get a tourist visa. You should now at least start to see what a complicated and unique place the Philippines is. This is why I was excited to get to the bottom of the issues most recently popping up in the mainstream media, which I feel often misses the subtle nuances of a situation, especially in a culture so foreign to Westerners as the Philippines. Now you know a little about what's going on here, the biggest issues being the drug war and martial law. My aim was to investigate each of these issues independently and see if there is any political commonality between the two. The Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, Daesh. What does any of it mean anymore? When people are hungry and frustrated, and there's no more faith in established organizational structures, you get to a point where sometimes it feels like the only way to get what you want is to take it. People who are hungry and frustrated are a powder keg. They only want justification by a moral authority to act illegally to further their own self-interest. If it wasn't Islam, it could have been socialism or any ingredient of a mixed bag of shit. We have a delicious buffet of worldwide ethno-religious extremism to get our 100% daily value of sectarian violence. In fact, I learned a lot more than I bargained for about the history of terrorism in the Philippines. It's a substantial history, and it breaks down like this. Terrorism can be clumped into two major categories in the Philippines, Muslim and Communist. The first three organizations on this list are the major Muslim groups. They all have an on-again, off-again relationship in terms of cooperation here. The Communist New People's Army operates in many of the country's mountainous regions. But yeah, in this case Islam happened to be at the disposal of some really bad people, and extremism was born. Why such power vacuums exist across the Muslim world is a different conversation altogether, but you can plainly see that the leaders are the smart ones here. They use the moral authority of an almighty deity to justify some of the most horrific shit I have ever seen on the internet. But it's not even just what they're doing, it's how they're doing it. Like, even if I was on board with the throw the gays off a building thing, I wouldn't want them in my neighborhood. Nah, this isn't an Arab thing, it's an ISIS thing. Because I saw this one where they drowned men they had beat the shit out of in a tank of their own drinking water. What, are you just gonna let them rot in your drinking water to brew some new and revolutionary corpse tea that fortifies your stamina? Get the fuck out of here, ISIS. Only perverts and psychos use Live Leak. But you can't just walk up to people in Marawi and see how they're doing, or walk into political officials' offices demanding answers. I mean, at the end of the day, who the hell am I? I'm not CNN, I'm not NBC, I'm a guy with some personal interest in telling a story and some cameras I got off Amazon. So much like the military, or business, or any endeavor in life, you need to build a network, especially if you're attempting to navigate unfamiliar waters. In this case, the crux of my network is the Jimenez family.
Hello, Mom!
Specifically, Mark Jimenez. He acted as my fixer, a producer, and most importantly, an advisor so I didn't do anything too stupid when interacting with the local populace. He also knew enough people who knew enough other people to get me in front of who I wanted to speak to for the conversations I wanted to have. Without him, this endeavor would not have been possible, and for that, I thank him. The first night, I could already see that Filipinos live a fundamentally different kind of life than I was used to. Families are large, they actually spend time with one another and enjoy it, and they have immense respect for their elders. In a sense, there's a rank structure where certain family members can instruct others to perform tasks, take on certain responsibilities, or even change the way they live their lives, drastically. One such example of a decision that could be made that would greatly alter the course of one's life is becoming what's called an overseas Filipino worker, or OFW. It's exactly what it sounds like. Go to other countries and do the jobs the locals don't want to do for more money than you would have made back home in the Philippines. Send said money back, repeat. They have a whole separate section for this at the airport to accommodate the 10 million OFWs that are currently working in 170 different countries. When you get to retirement age, hopefully the people who you sent money to treated it intelligently and didn't blow it on some bullshit.
Shut up and take my money!
Thus devaluing the sacrifice you made in an attempt to elevate the whole family. I'd love to think that every family can ride the hard work of one individual and use that bump in resources to feed future success, but I know human beings. Reinvesting something you didn't work for into your future success is not something we always put at the top of our priority list, especially when we're young. Maybe that's part of the reason this culture reveres its elders so much. They've borne the scars of the mistakes life has thrown at them and can advise future generations how to avoid making the same errors. The irony of the situation is that young people have a bad habit of not listening to their elders. This is Gani Jimenez. He's the president and CEO of a logistics company that delivers building materials throughout the Philippines with operations in 12 different locations. You may say, hey Doug, that man doesn't look like the president and CEO of a logistics company that delivers building materials throughout the Philippines with operations in 12 different locations. To that I say, wrong! That's exactly what the president and CEO of a logistics company that delivers building materials throughout the Philippines with operations in 12 different locations looks like. It's kind of like how Keanu Reeves still rides the New York City subway. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, these families are close and they love each other immensely. There is very little that will break the bonds present in a Filipino family. And there's one added benefit. When people like this decide that they like you after an initial screening process to make sure you don't suck, they welcome you with open arms, almost as though you are actually one of their own. These really are awesome people. So now you know a little about me and my Filipino friends, and you've picked up a little information about Filipino history and culture. We can dive into the martial law and drug stuff now. A lot of people refer to the Filipino people as resilient. It's because not only have they been dealing with a conflict against communist rebels for over 50 years, a bloody war on drugs, and a recent Islamic State uprising, they have to deal with natural adversity on a frequent basis in the form of tropical storms and typhoons. These often lead to massive flooding, which can cause property damage, injury, and in some cases death. Ghani hates the word resilient. He prefers the term resourceful, and I get it, I really do. Because resilient means that you're the nail, and resourceful means that you're the hammer. It's all about framing your situation from a standpoint of weakness versus one of strength. Resiliency denotes reactivity, whereas resourcefulness denotes proactivity. Sometimes nature has a hand in things that you can't control, in things like typhoons. But walking through life with a greater measure of autonomy and personal sovereignty is definitely the way I'd rather be if I have any control over it. In any event, if you combine this notion of resourcefulness with the tightly knit families here, it is a powerful combination if aimed effectively. And these notions really are important because most Westerners can't fathom the day-to-day difficulty many average Filipinos deal with. Let me give you an example. I met this girl from the Philippines in Scotland back in 2009. It was at a place called the Lulu Bar in Edinburgh. She could fit her entire fist into her mouth. The topic of poverty came up and I told her I empathize with those who struggle because my dad lost his job when I was a kid and we almost lost the house. That my parents had a mortgage on in New Jersey with a real roof and real walls. It had electricity, heat in the winter, air conditioning in the summer. There was always food on the table at mealtime. There was always a shower, always a warm bed. It had everything you needed to live. I even had a Super Nintendo. I turned 27 years old in Edinburgh that night. And although I'd done 2 tours in Iraq just before that, I always figured much of Iraq was the way it was due to the results of the war. Poverty. I didn't even really know the true meaning of the word. At the end of the day, people want to do what's best for themselves and their families. The U.S. Constitution phrases it as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is Davao City. It's significant to this story for a few reasons. One is that it happens to be the largest city on the island of Mindanao, which, if you remember, was under martial law at the time of this filming due to an Islamic State uprising. Another reason is that President Rodrigo Duterte was the mayor of this city and was re-elected 6 times. He had immense support for being tough on crime, and now today his daughter Sarah has taken his place as mayor. In Davao City, all I found was resounding support for the drug war and martial law when talking to the locals. For the first few days, my bullshit detector was going off the charts. I really thought there was absolutely no way people would support a drug war like this, or more importantly, what amounts to a military occupation on the entire island of about 20 million people. For me, it goes against every fiber of my being as an American in the Merca sense of the word. We're going to speak to the Director of Investments, Lemuel Artonio, and the Director of Tourism, Rose Texon. You're going to notice a trend. For the most part, people looking to make money fully support both the drug war as well as martial law.
Okay, so I'm Lemuel Artonio. I'm the officer in charge of the Davao City Investment Promotion Center. Davao City Investment Promotion Center is the primary marketing arm of the city government in attracting investors here in the city. So we provide assistance to potential investors like business permits facilitation. We link them with the different local businesses that we have here, the different industry associations, and we also provide fiscal incentives to those who are going to invest in Davao City.
How have you seen martial law affect the desire to invest during this whole experience?
I have to be candid also that during the first month that the martial law was declared, a lot of potential investors were in a state of wait and see. But then after a month, we saw that a lot of the investment inquiries were coming back again. Just last month, we were able to accommodate around 24 potential investors. People in Mindanao understand what martial law is here in Mindanao, but people from, let's say, from Luzon, from Visayas, or even from outside of the Philippines, they have a different perception on how martial law is implemented here.
Okay.
And this is a good thing also that we are able to show to them that it's the martial law that they are thinking, it's not the martial law that we are currently implementing.
And is the drug problem a problem in Davao City just like it is everywhere else?
He has established very good peace and order programs in the city. He has been cited for the many initiatives that he has instituted in the city in terms of peace and order programs.
Would it be fair to say that he's a tough man with tough policies?
Well, yes. Yes.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
A lot of Western critics say it a lot more harshly. What is the response to that from the day-to-day person with, the implementation of violence towards not just the drug dealers, but also the addicts? Is that something that people think about often?
Here in Davao, I don't think. No.
Not really?
Not really.
Okay. It's not really even a concern.
No.
Okay, I understand. What the Western critics say, the news sources from my country, what they always say is that Duterte employs the police force in a way that doesn't align itself with due process in order to collect the criminals properly and imprison them, and they go more towards quicker elimination, to put it politely.
There are still no clear evidences that directly link him with these kinds of activities.
Of course not.
Clearly the guy in charge of investments for the city isn't going to be talking a lot of shit about Duterte's tactics in the drug war or martial law when he's a guy that's trying to make a living. He's trying to remain loyal and put out the information and not rock the boat too much. I understand completely. You're going to see something similar with the Director of Tourism as well.
I'm the City Tourism Operations Officer of Davao City. So I'm the one in charge of the activities and tourism, the direction that tourism takes here in Davao.
Sell Davao City to us. Why do we want to come be a tourist in Davao?
I think it's because President Rudy has been talking so much about Davao City that the rest of the country wants to know what's the difference between the rest of the Philippines and Davao City. What's that about the thing that they say about no liquor ban? Or what's that they say about no smoking anywhere? Or what's that they say about you can walk at 2 in the morning in Davao City? Davao City? Mindanao, right? So when they come here, then we are proven right. The president is proven right. You can walk at 2 a.m. without anybody harassing you. See? So what makes Davao different? It's this. It's our way of life. And we are a melting pot of different people. Mm-hmm. We have 11 tribes here.
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 of
I've
whom...
noticed a lot of diversity here.
Yeah, 6 of whom are Muslims, mm-hmm. and 5 indigenous people. So you wonder, how do they get along? Right? And we do. Yeah. And it's not only just the 11 tribes. It's us Christians and other people coming in from the different parts of the Philippines, as well as a good amount of expats here in Davao. We all live in harmony. Why? Because we follow all the rules and regulations. We've been through hard times in the 80s, and we've seen the difference between then and now.
What do people like to do the most?
Okay, ever since President Rudy became president, the #1 thing that you should do here is do the Duterte tour.
I know you have another meeting, and I don't want to hold you up too much. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for coming to Davao.
Thank you.
My preconceived notions were still pretty much intact at this point. I didn't buy that people actually supported this as much as they said they did. I was sure they were scared of repercussions from speaking out. My first meeting with government officials served to reinforce this notion because I was still looking at the top-down situation very much like an entitled Westerner with all of the associated benefits most of us don't even realize are special. At this point in my experience, I thought the unwavering support was an elaborate house of cards that I was determined to tear down. I knew it was going to be important to talk to a large sample size to get an accurate representation of reality. That meant traveling to different places. So me and my friends took a 3.5-hour bus ride to a city called General Santos, still on the island of Mindanao, still under martial law. As you can see, this checkpoint that I probably shouldn't have been taking footage of is very much a normal thing on the entire island of Mindanao. General Santos is a city of over 500,000 people situated as a local regional center for commerce and industry. It's named after Paulino Santos, who was a former general in the Philippine Army and the settlement's leading pioneer. Demographically, this city is mostly Christian with about 2% Muslims. The major industries are agriculture and fishing, but you could have just Googled that or looked it up on Wikipedia. I wanted to talk to people doing all different kinds of things. Oftentimes in the Philippines, it may not be easy to get a well-paying job working for someone else. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, I'm saying that oftentimes you need to make your own opportunity here. My first night in town, I got a chance to have conversations with a few entrepreneurs whose ages range from mid-20s to early 40s. My preconceived notions were again shattered because, as you may expect by now, resounding support for martial law and the drug war.
I just had dinner with a bunch of young entrepreneurs ranging from the ages of late 20s to early 40s, and I'm just going to let them talk about their experience here in Mindanao and what they think about things like martial law, the state of affairs in the Philippines in general, how they feel their prospects are, and how they feel about the future. So I'm going to let them talk, and you're going to hear their opinions.
Hi everyone, I'm Ralph Lyco. I'm 28 years old, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm based here in General Santos City at the southern part of Mindanao. If you know Manny Pacquiao, that's where it came from. Is it worthy to be based here in Mindanao? And especially that the martial law is happening now. Of course, it's generally peaceful. And I think the biggest problem here is the perception of people, especially people from the north or from Luzon and other media entities that sensationalize the idea of martial law, making it sound like we are in a big mess, like we're like up for war, something bad is gonna happen. It's actually generalizing, they're generalizing the whole of Mindanao, and actually it's just one small place. We still do transactions, we operate, our sales are still high, and we're doing really well as a business. We're expanding in 2 months' time. So nothing really changed much. It's just maybe, I think, perspective of how martial law is. Martial law here for me is correction. Martial law here for me is making or securing the whole island for whatever that comes next. But beyond that, I'm pretty confident. I'm very confident that we're living in good times. Maybe I'll say we're living in better times because of martial law.
Okay, my name is Paulo Sunglao. I own a restaurant in Jensan. How do we feel about the martial law? There are portions that might have been exaggerated on the news. The whole martial law thing, well, I think it might have had affected the business in general, because lately since Duterte became a president, Mindanao was able to attract a lot of investors. But I do hope that with the Duterte administration and how he has been handling things, I really do hope that we are getting somewhere. Like, I trust him. I've been in Davao for quite some time. I've stayed there, and I feel on how disciplined people are there. And if we're gonna, with his leadership, if he is going to bring it into a national level, so there's hope for everyone. There's hope for the Philippines. There's hope for Mindanao.
Hi there, my name is Calvin Pareño, and I'm 34 years old, and I'm an entrepreneur by profession. And martial law, well, I feel like I'm feel safe with martial law, and I feel like Duterte is doing good with the country.
I'm Kay Lyco. I'm 28 years old. I'm the CEO of Sam Holdings, which is a company me and my brother founded 2 years ago. So we manage brands here in Mindanao, here in General Santos City. I grew up with a curriculum that's basically telling us that martial law was bad, or martial law was, they had deaths. It was something that was inculcated with us ever since childhood. So when the idea of martial law was prompted to us, it was kind of scary at first. However, when we started actually feeling it, and when we started to see soldiers at night, you know what, it's not really scary as people from Manila would tell the news.
I think that Mindanao is one of the best places to be in right now. For me, as a professional, I came from Metro Manila. I worked in Metro Manila,
And finally, I decided to come back to Mindanao. This is my hometown. I am so in love with it. And, you know, it's been a better life for me. And whatever we see on TV is really, really very different. You know, I think TV is like a big marketing package where you put an image on something like a place, and you know it's easy to say that this is a bad place, this is a good place, but you know, coming from the mouths of those who live here, I can actually say that Mindanao is a very, very nice place. It is a peaceful place. Whatever you see on TV, it's not always the truth. Now, moving forward to the topic of the martial law, nothing really has changed. I think that I've been living the same lifestyle. You know, there's no fear. In fact, I kind of feel safer now with martial law.
What about the accusations of, the West and some people on other islands of the Philippines regarding police activity and everything towards not just drug dealers but addicts? Are human rights being violated at all?
Well, would you rather have these drug addicts, drug lords, and you know these people involved in the drug trade violate human rights? Would you rather have that than, you know, just have them realigned with a greater vision of society, of having a clean society?
So you look at it as a societal cleanup?
I would say that it is a cleanup, and I think that it is necessary.
So you consider any human rights violations that may happen as acceptable collateral damage so you can move forward in a better way in the future? Is that the common thread for people?
You know what? In the ideal scenario, you want everything to be peaceful. But you know, we have to be realistic.
But do addicts deserve the same treatment as the people perpetuating the trade itself?
Well, I think there's a better way of handling the addicts. But you know, if we're talking about the fastest, the quicker way of cleaning up, I think that, this is the most, I wouldn't call it wise. But somehow, in a sense, I would call it effective.
See, these people weren't all necessarily close to one another either, meaning that I wasn't limiting myself to one particular social circle. The more time I spent in the Philippines, the less I felt I knew. It really did show me that maybe not everyone looks at things the same way I do. Different people have different thresholds of what's acceptable in different circumstances. Sometimes a problem is bad enough where you finally accept that which you previously would not have, just to one day hopefully live what you would consider some semblance of a normal life. One thing I found interesting is that the Western media likes to tout Duterte's propaganda machine as the driving force of his approval rating and support for his methods. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. However, an overwhelming majority of the people I spoke to point to how hard it was to get anything done prior to the war on drugs. This was because the problem with drug-related violence was that bad, on the part of both the pushers fighting each other, as well as the addicts who would rob people, often violently, in order to get their next fix. Many are simply willing to suspend human empathy for those that fall victim to this lifestyle. Those willing to make those concessions explain that these people have had their chance and they have made their life choices. When it came to the topic of martial law, they didn't seem to mind that the whole island was occupied by the army. They see it as an enhanced security measure that further allows them to go about their daily business. Anytime I asked the obvious question of why they thought martial law had to be instated on the whole island of 20 million people as opposed to just the problem areas around the city of Marawi, which is an 8-hour drive away, I got similar answers, but the one that stuck out to me was that the Islamic State is a cancer, and when you fight cancer, you have to apply chemotherapy to your whole body, not just one place. I agree with the Islamic State being the worst kind of cancer. I guess I just wish I knew a better way to cure it. But no matter how you slice it, they love President Duterte around here. It's sentiments like these that allow places like this to exist.
So we're here at the General Santos Farmers Market. We're going to take a quick walk through.
Things like this would have been way more difficult to accomplish with a higher security threat. I even bought a sugarcane juice. But that being said, I told you I didn't limit myself to one social circle. I also won't limit myself to one age or occupational demographic either. This is Raymond Salangsang, who's the regional governor for the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Southwestern Mindanao.
I am Raymond Salangsang. I am the regional governor for the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Southwestern Mindanao. We feel more safer now than before. If you have no problem with the law, then you should have no problem with the martial law.
What would you say to the critics in the West that question the methods through which Duterte is conducting the drug war?
The fight on the drug war here, done by the government, is pretty much effective. Now they instill fear to those people who are what we say. Maybe we can consider them as criminals because of the effect of drugs on them. They're harming the innocent individuals, and now they have fear in them. The war on drugs is really they feeling it, and they're now fearing the government. So it's pretty effective. They said that there are some human rights abuses. Maybe that would be a what you can say something like that is unavoidable. Like in war, there are casualties of war. Maybe there are the innocent casualties, but that's unavoidable. There are those who just need rehabilitation. You can consider that a health problem.
Right.
But on others, it's really criminality. So you have to deal that with the full force of law. They rape, they hold up, they kidnap, they do all things that are against the other persons. They're hurting others.
And this is Ray Bilyena. He's the chairman of the Philippine National Police Region 12 Advisory Council, a former governor of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as the chairman of a committee representing Region 12 that is helping President Duterte in his endeavor to change the way Filipino people compete in the global market.
My name is Ray Bilyena. I am the chairman of the Philippine National Police Region 12 Advisory Council. I'm a former governor of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Since the start of his campaign, he already put up a platform that he wants to follow in order to move his government forward. And one of those platforms is very simple: fight against drugs, fight against criminality, fight against corruption. If these three things are laid out clean, whom do you think that the foreign investment will not come in? What the president wants is just to stabilize this country. What the president wants is anybody, any Filipino should have that sense of responsibility, no, peaceful, love of country, and sovereignty. No,
makes sense.
Yeah, advocacy of sovereignty, not that that colonial mentality. That whatever the Caucasian colored person says,
of course,
we just follow. Now it's different. If the allies are not helping, if the allies are putting conditions to their help, never mind the help. We will just we will continue and probably source us other help. And you do not have to say, okay, here's $100 billion of help, but you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that.
So you think it's almost making a deal with the devil when there's too many conditions on the stimulation that your economy would need in the form of a loan from an external source?
Correct.
What would you say to the accusations of extrajudicial killings to both dealers and addicts? Is that over exaggerated? Is that sensationalism? Is it real?
If you have not been through having problems with drug addicts, perhaps your judgment is not right.
Okay.
But if you are in a situation where a drug dependent or a drug addict, you say, does not have control of his mind, he killed his own family, he raped his own sister, he do a lot of heinous crimes, no? You will understand where's the killing is coming from. Who are these people being killed? Well, probably there are collateral damage there.
Do you think the killing is necessary for both the peddlers as well as the addicts? Because in a lot of westernized nations, the theory is that drug addicts are those that deserve a more compassionate hand in terms of mental health assistance and recovery versus criminal punishment.
He wants to go into that direction.
Okay.
But with the bureaucratic system of the government, you cannot just simply get money and build rehabilitation center.
It almost sounds like this whole thing is an exercise in pragmatism at the moment before you can go to where you'd want to be idealistically.
Correct. If you look at statistics now and before, well, there could be a slight increase this year, but it's the same statistic as last year. Many people are killed, but those times, the people that are killed are the good people by the criminals, by the drug addicts. But the news now, the people that were being killed are drug addicts, are criminals. 90% of Mindanao is for martial law.
Much like the younger entrepreneurs I spoke to the previous evening, these gentlemen were very enthusiastic about Filipino economic prospects for the future. At the end of the day, they just want to live successful lives like you and I do. They also don't want the drug problem or extremist groups to get in the way. In fact, they are in overwhelming support of the current administration and its policies. Ray Billena also had an interesting point about national autonomy. This is a weird one for me because I truly do see both sides. As a human, I'm adamantly against extrajudicial killings and other forms of summary justice that don't allow people to have their day in court. In my eyes, due process is just the right thing to do. However, there's another very strong pull I have. The right to a nation's sovereignty is sacred. I think we as Americans assume we have too much say in the affairs of other countries. I'm not so naive as to think we actually care about other people and that it's not under the guise of maintaining political influence to benefit economically in some way. I just think the fact that we can't solve our own problems and have the gall to try and force solutions onto other people's problems we don't fully comprehend in a cultural landscape our experts barely seem to understand is a little sickening. What the hell are we doing? Look, I'm not saying something like this is okay. It's not. Not at all. Not by a long shot. But maybe we should try to fix our own problems before we go criticizing other people and come off sounding like hypocrites. I never grew up in a neighborhood where I was ever scared to go outside. Maybe my sensibilities would be different if I had. We saw all of this optimism in General Santos, which is an 8-hour drive from the center point of the Islamic State uprising. It was time to get a little closer to the reason the island was under martial law in the first place. The next stop was a city called Cagayan de Oro. We quickly went to our hotel and checked in.
We just ended up in a city called Cagayan de Oro, which is about 3 hours from Marawi, and I was talking to Mark about, what we're doing tomorrow and some of the things that we're doing, with regard to our hotel stay, just like a normal person would. But then afterwards, he was like, hey man, we can't really be discussing this as freely here as we could everywhere else. And I was like, oh shit, I didn't really think about that. It's been a while since I'd been in that mindset. But then we stepped outside after we checked into the hotel, and the difference was palpable. First of all, it all started with this shady Indonesian dude asking the check-in girl at the hotel if she had been to church today, and he was clearly a Muslim man, and it was just a weird situation, and the more and more I think about it, I'm playing through the whole situation in my head again, and that was really weird. And when we walked outside, we went to like a 7-Eleven to get some water and some snacks, because all the restaurants are closed. I'm not sure if there's an official curfew or not, but that's neither here nor there. Walking down the street, we walked maybe a total of about 200 meters and made a turn and then came back. But the difference is palpable in the atmosphere. I'm not saying I feel unsafe. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic or say that something bad will happen. I'm just saying it's definitely a different environment here. This is not General Santos. This is not Davao City. This is a different place. And the people are different. The atmosphere is different. And I can't pinpoint it, but my spider senses are going off. This is a strange place. So we're going to do our business tomorrow and the next day, and after that, at that same day, we're going to leave, and we're going to get the first thing smoking to Manila, because at that point we can, eat, drink, be merry, and live our lives normally at that point, and then get everything else done that we wanted to for this documentary. But all I'm saying is that this is the first time that I felt a little bit different.
The first two places I was like, business as usual, this is fucking fine. But as you get closer to where we are, now we're 3 hours from the IS occupation, and all I'm saying is that there's a noticeable difference in atmosphere. I don't have a word for it, it's just different, and it's causing me to have this extremely heightened state of awareness, and I want to get this done, I want to do a good job doing it, and then I want to leave.
We had to wait an extra day for our friend Eugene Boko to arrive. He's from the Marawi area, knows the language, and works in a field where he had contacts that were invaluable to our endeavor. He's a good person and did great work for us. Although we were still about 2.5 hours from Marawi, I noticed a very real difference in the atmosphere of this city versus where I had been previously. We eventually rented a car. Later that night, we went out to eat and drove around a little to take a look at the city. We didn't do too much exploring here though because we wanted to keep a low profile. The next day we got organized for our next destination called Iligan. Iligan is a city that's about a 1 hour's drive from Marawi.
Waiting in line for checkpoint. I have no idea how long it's going to take.
Iligan is the city closest to Marawi and has been on the front line of dealing with the refugee crisis. While in the area, I received an Excel spreadsheet showing the amount of internally displaced persons, or IDPs, who were affected by the crisis in Marawi. There are many cities throughout the Philippines that have accepted Marawi refugees into their communities. Unfortunately, the short-notice nature of armed uprisings made it impossible to plan for tremendous fluctuations in regional population without the infrastructure and organization to support it already in place. Many cities took in IDPs, but none more than Iligan. Iligan City took in a staggering 92,617 refugees as of August 2017. Think about that for a second, everyone. Your city of 350,000 people just got smacked with the coordination and funding of 90+ thousand people who need places to eat, sleep, shit, and exist. That's a 26% increase in population in less than 6 months. Imagine walking around St. Louis or New Orleans and noticing that there are that many more people walking around with nowhere else to go and little hope of personal and economic recovery moving forward. It's a brutal reality to face for those going through it. We started out by going to City Hall.
We're in the city of Iligan right now. It's the closest point that we can get to Islamic State-occupied Marawi. We're on the way to City Hall. The person that we hired to provide security and the local language has some contacts there that might be able to bring us to a refugee center where we can talk to the people that have been most directly impacted. Getting into the city, I thought that the checkpoint process was going to be a lot more harrowing. They literally just let us right through and didn't even check our IDs. So that's it. We can't, to my knowledge, go any further than this to Marawi because most recently, and by most recently I mean literally about a day and a half ago, the Islamic State has taken 120 more hostages, so the entire area just beyond this is on lockdown. So we're going to go to City Hall, we're going to talk to our security person's contact and see if we can get to the refugee center.
That took us to the headquarters for the Iligan City branch of an organization called the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office, or DRRMO.
We are in front of the Disaster Risk Reduction Management Office, and we're going to get identification cards in order to go to the forward area where they have the people that work with the refugees directly. And then hopefully from there, we'll be able to speak with refugees, either there or at another location. What they need to do right now is look at our identification and give us volunteer IDs, and we're going to go inside and do that right now.
Eugene knew a guy who knew the head of this organization, and he vouched for us. The DRRMO were kind enough to facilitate our efforts. We began by speaking to the head of this organization, Mr. Patrick Nunez.
Our role here in Iligan, we're the host city for the evacuees and the IDPs coming from Lanao del Sur, or the province of Arm, autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao. Our big role here is we host around 19,000 families. That's equivalent to 93,000 individuals.
Is there anything that you have to do differently than you would have to do on a day-to-day basis in terms of dealing with the individual people that you continue to receive?
Yes. actually we have to attend these IDPs here in our city is because number one, our population bloated every day, and we have to manage the traffic because there are some of IDPs are they have their own cars, their vehicles. Second, we have to manage now the waste disposal of our IDPs.
How have you noticed the refugees' psychological state due to the unique nature of this crisis versus other disasters that you've had to provide relief for? Is there is there a difference between Typhoon Yolanda versus the Islamic State and the fallout from that?
There's a big difference, especially on the security component. For a natural calamity, you just manage the entire evacuees. As you notice, we are very tight on our security.
Yes, I did.
In our checkpoints.
Yes.
Just bear with that. It's because our law and order cluster, the PNP and the armed forces, they know they're better than us.
Of course.
So we leave it to them. So we will not compromise security where our people will be put in danger. The martial law is a big help for us. The lessons learned here, our learning curves here is managing the IDPs it's a difficult one. It's because we have a different cultures. So we also manage the culture sensitivity of our brothers and sisters. These are Islam brothers and sisters. It's because culturally we're not the same.
Right, of course.
First, our evacuation center should be culturally sensitive. We manage also their, the Rido thing, the fighting both families on Lanao Luzon. So,
tribal conflict.
Yeah, so that's why where martial law is a great help for our city, that they would not quarrel here inside our city.
Is there anything you'd like to let people that are either in the West or in the international community know that they may not know from not having been here on the ground, experiencing it like you have?
Well, perception is reality, but let us correct this wrong perception.
Please.
That martial law will be used for abuse. Of course not. The martial law implements curfew. We did that here in Ligan, which is very effective. We implement 9 o'clock curfew time. And partly of the economic side, which is the business sector, affected. But once we institute discipline, I think martial law could have big help for us.
Received our IDs from the City Disaster Risk Reduction Management Office, and we're going to head over to the place that almost acts as a feeder point to all the different refugee centers. We're going to talk to the people there, although what we've just discovered is that due to the fact that a lot of these refugee centers accept refugees as they come, you're going to see a lot of them are from different tribes. And if you know anything about tribal cultures, oftentimes you're going to have disputes between different tribes that are going to happen a little bit more readily than if people are from the same tribe, from a uniform group. So there's a familial argument at the refugee center that we had planned on going to. I don't know that they're going to let us in anymore because they're trying to quell the dispute, and I think they're worried about violence being a potential factor here. So we're still going to go to the feeder point that will direct us to the different refugee centers, and we're going to see if we can still talk to the people. Here we are, waiting here back if we can get to the refugee center. You like this sweet burner phone? This is one of those murder phones. You like it? We're headed over to the evacuation center. We're going to talk to some of the evacuees. Hopefully some of them want to tell us their stories.
This is one of the refugee camps currently accepting people. As you can see, conditions are definitely not optimal. This can't go on forever because every day the risk of unrest grows. Much of the conflict in the Muslim world is based on tribal politics that Westerners can't really understand because it's so foreign to the way we do things. Think of it as ever-increasing rings of loyalty based on those immediately close to you, like your family, which expands to your extended family, a small community, a larger community, and eventually a region or maybe even a nation. In the United States, there are a lot of people that are all about America as an entity. The country, the union that the flag represents. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people from tribal cultures can't love a country, but if I were a betting man, I'd say they'd turn their backs on the greater whole the second things got bad enough for their smaller communities. This is what sparks a lot of the local beefs and sectarian violence in countries whose borders were drawn up by Europeans after World War I. They really had no idea what the hell was going on. What you have in these camps now are people trickling in from a variety of families, tribes, neighborhoods, and walks of life. We spoke to a woman named Esterlina Latinga. She's a newly retired teacher who lost her home due to the fighting. It burned to the ground a few weeks ago prior to filming this, and she now lives in this small space.
I am Esterlina Latinga, live in Datu suburb, Marawi City. Last May 23, nag-start yung...
Okay, so last May 23, she was surprised because there was a conflict and then the gunfire started, and she was very shocked. And she got news that they need to evacuate, and their house is near the camp, and they need to go to the camp.
How long between the start of the gunfire and the news to evacuate?
Kuan lang, parang 1 hour.
And their neighbors were telling her that you just go to the evacuation center and you just sleep there with your family. And leave everything else behind.
Marami na kami doon sa evacuate. Lahat ng mga kapitbahay namin ng mga baryo, barangay.
And all our neighbors also went there because they were afraid that there are already explosives being planted and they were still fighting.
We were being evacuated first within Marawi City.
Right.
And the gunfire still continued. Bombs were everywhere. Explosions were everywhere. So her son told her that let's just go down to illegal and be evacuated in this time. It's much safer now.
And you've been here ever since?
Yes. Pagka July 17,
so last July 17, I heard that my house was already burned.
Stories like hers are not unique either. There are currently over 350,000 internally displaced persons because of this Islamic State uprising. Although I've seen clips of the violence in Marawi and short snippets on the news, it doesn't seem to do it justice in terms of showing what the very real ramifications of war are in such a short amount of time. It's been a long time since I've been in a war zone, and the last time I was, it was for very different reasons. During that part of my life, I was forced to block out a certain amount of human empathy, or at least reframe it, just so I could do my job. If you take in too much negativity on a regular basis, that starts to seem normal and could potentially affect how you perceive and interact with the world in the future. If you are emotionally connected to all of that negativity, you're in for a bad time. Now, after almost a decade of living in a nice, safe, comfortable home, with my wife and cat, not really worrying too much about personal safety, I was confronted with the reality I had almost forgotten existed on a large chunk of the planet. In this case, it's the Philippines, but these ramifications are pretty much standard fare anytime one group of idiots picks up a bunch of guns to hunt down another group of idiots. After seeing the results of this firsthand, something that most Westerners have no visibility of, I thought maybe martial law is the right answer to end things quickly and definitively. Either way, regardless of your political leanings, if you saw a bunch of places like this crop up in your town, it would be readily apparent that this situation is unsustainable if the security threat isn't dealt with swiftly. People like Patrick Nunez and his entire organization are swimming against the tide here. They're fighting through quicksand and need all the help they can get. I sincerely hope that this situation gets resolved quickly, because there are a lot of people whose lives have been entirely ruined because of this. As you've noticed, there's been a lot of support for both the drug war as well as martial law in Mindanao. Our next stop was to one of the other major islands in the Philippines called Luzon. I wasn't really sure how people's attitudes, bias, and preconceived notions would change in this region of the country.
We just landed in Manila, the capital of the Philippines. We're going to do the same thing that we did in Mindanao to see where people are at with martial law and the drug war and everything like that. We expect to see some different opinions, but I really don't know. Because up until now, my entire exposure to the Philippines has been the island of Mindanao. So let's see what we can see.
Don't get me wrong, I still ran into people in Manila that supported the drug war and martial law. Some more adamantly than others. This is Romeo Tamperia. He's the barangay chairman of Barangay 122 of Tondo, Manila. It's a small neighborhood. To put
put it into Western terms, a barangay is the smallest administrative division in the Philippine government. The barangay chairman is like a city councilman.
I'm Mr. Barangay Chairman Romeo B. Tamparia. I've been in this service for 10 years, so this is my last term. My main purpose of seeking this position is to enlighten the inhabitants here. Our main problem here, why I've been interested in seeking this position, because of the drug problem.
Ever since Duterte took power, he has stepped up his war against drugs. Has that helped you or hurt you? How has that affected your small community here?
It helps a lot.
Helps a lot?
Yeah.
You're okay with all of the methods?
Yes, I'm okay. 2 thumbs up.
What about the addicts? Not just the dealers, the people that are addicted.
Okay, so what he did is he's the one working with the addicts, and because the police officers cannot go at the small-time addicts, he's the one working with them.
A lot of reports have been coming out that the police officers are just eliminating the addicts in the most efficient way possible through the use of extrajudicial killings. Not just the dealers, not just the criminals that are providing the drugs, but the addicts also. Have you noticed that in your neighborhood?
Yes.
And are people okay with the addicts just being eliminated like that?
Ang hirap magsalita, pero ako okay ako.
It's very hard to say, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm okay.
Do you think this the drug war that Duterte has enacted has been a good thing?
Yes. He should have to continue it.
Continue it. Now, the addicts, are they making life difficult because they commit crimes to try to get more drugs? Is that why the addicts are a problem?
Yes.
Or are they just a nuisance?
No.
They do crimes.
They do crimes. Pero ibang to.
But what he does is he goes up the houses of those suspected drug addicts at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Have conversation
with them.
2007 alone, I have 18 cases filed against me.
Filed against you for what?
Kasama na yan, doon sa disiplinang ginagawa ko.
Different instances, just for him to enforce discipline.
Cases filed against you for enforcing discipline. That seems vague. What does that mean?
No, sometimes, there are times na pagka kinausap mo,
sometimes when he would go to their house, first time, they would not talk to him. Second time, they would not hear him.
Pa rin.
Third time, he would just get those persons and bring them to the prison.
Okay.
And then the relatives of those suspected addicts would file a case.
The word barangay comes from the word balangay, which is a type of boat native to the region. This guy's awesome. He's like a walking Filipino Quentin Tarantino character. I think it's pretty safe to say this guy's got some unorthodox methods. He was nice enough to speak to me in great detail about his neighborhood, and although some of his methods may be considered odd by Western standards, his community seems to respond positively. We also took a tour of his neighborhood and he introduced me to the locals. If you haven't figured it out yet, Romy's a staunch supporter of Duterte and the war on drugs. As I was leaving, he proudly told me about the time that he himself killed a violent criminal and that he received a commendation from the police chief of Manila for his efforts. He told me, and I quote verbatim, he was very violent, so I was kind enough to offer his soul to the Lord. I asked him if I could quote that. He proudly told me that I could. Then he flashed a handgun that he carried in the elastic band of his shorts. Whatever your political leanings are, that's some gangster-ass shit. Ultimately, I did eventually encounter some people that didn't support the new status quo with regard to the drug war and martial law. I was beginning to feel like I was walking through a gigantic echo chamber until I met a woman named May Panair. May is a well-known political activist in the Philippines and goes by the moniker Juana Change. A couple of weeks prior to filming this, she got in some hot water for wearing a military uniform during one of her protests. As a former army officer who's seen his fair share of Facebook stolen valor porn, I can see why people would get touchy because of this. Although, I tend to look at protests differently than outright impersonation for some sort of personal gain. But then again, isn't making a protest's target people a little upset the whole point of protesting in the first place? May has her convictions and is not afraid to speak out about them. We're here at the Power Plant Mall.
we're going to have a meeting with a woman named Wanna Change. It's a play on words, like want a change, because she's a very outspoken critic of Rodrigo Duterte. And we're going to see what she has to say.
Well, actually, first and foremost, you do know that I am an artist. I have been an activist since like 1984. I was incarcerated during the Marcos Law years.
During the first martial law?
During the first martial law, I was in prison. And then, as a theater artist was how I learned love for country. So I campaigned for the past president. You know, on stage, face to face like this, I told him, I'm gonna bust your fucking balls if you're not to be the real change that you promised. And you know what he says? Wow, we should be very careful because Wanna Change is gonna bust our balls. They cannot think beyond themselves. I mean, if they have a problem and the problem of theirs is solved, they don't fucking care for others if they live or die.
Right.
I mean, nobody thinks of the bigger picture.
Much of the Western media I've looked at to date would have everyone believe that all detractors are swiftly dealt with. I can't say this is the case definitively because I have not seen any proof of it firsthand. But to be honest, for a woman like May to have been allowed to exist for as long as she has in a place like this actually speaks volumes about their collective concept of freedom of speech. If freedom of speech is a spectrum, then at least this seems to be heading in the right direction. Look, I'm not saying there isn't a government narrative, because there totally is. But May isn't getting coerced with physical violence either. In fact, she's got a one-woman show about the drug war running through the end of the year at the Manila Cultural Center.
What I'm doing now is I'm doing a play. It's called Tao Po. Because you know, when you knock on the door of a home, you always say Tao Po. Tao Po is a one-woman show. All me, and I got to portray 4 different characters. One is of a mother who lost her husband and her son. One is an 11-year-old girl who lost both her parents in front of her. You know, they shot her father, they shot her mother, and when she put her hand on her head, her hand went halfway inside her skull. Another one is a media personality, he's a photographer, and another one is the point of view of the killer. I have very good friends who I debate with because they are pro-Duterte. But I cannot just, you know, when you talk, sometimes you just want to win the dialogue. No, I want to win the hearts of people, to be able to tell them, hey guys, I mean, you know, let us just be more compassionate. I mean, let us just be able to try to understand the value of what? Of law, of order, of love. I mean, you know, what's so fucking wrong with that?
Now, a lot of you might be thinking that it's odd that I've talked to so many people and literally only one person has spoken out against Duterte and his policies. I know I was really expecting the opinions in Luzon to be quite different than Mindanao. There's obviously enough people who support the ideas of May and those like her for there to be an entire political movement, so there's definitely traction, but I still haven't seen the volume of detractors I thought I would in my daily interactions. However, the one thing that bugs me with activists in general is that they like to use phrases like shift in consciousness and paradigm shift.
I do not know what the problem is of my country, but I really think it is in the consciousness. That's why in my hopes, with the kind of advocacy that I'm pushing for, that the revolution be in the consciousness. Because whoever you put, I mean, if in your consciousness, killing is okay, as a means to an end, then I don't know how that will really change things from the very core.
But they rarely provide discrete, actionable solutions.
I mean, I just know that I'm helping shape a narrative by making my own narrative.
Look, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but I learned something in my life. For example, if you ever had a job and you messed something up, or maybe something is messed up through no fault of your own, you go to your boss to raise a red flag. But in my personal experience, you don't do that without at least trying to also present some possible solutions to the flaw you're pointing out. The same thing applies here, I think. Offering solutions in addition to pointing out problems serves as a springboard to actually solving the problem rather than adding fuel to an already raging inferno. And it's important, because there's a whole younger generation relying on both people like May, as well as the establishment, to not torpedo their future opportunities. We're here at the University of the Philippines. We're going to talk to some of the students to see what they think about the drug war and martial law. Historically, in many different cultures, universities have been the hotbed of political dissent, where a lot of revolutions start, and here in the Philippines it's no different. So we're going to see what some of the college students think, the would-be free thinkers, and see what we can get. We spoke to several students from different fields of study, and they all pretty much had similar ideas. This was encouraging to me because until my time in Manila, I was thinking that maybe I'm wrong in the way that I see the situation because I don't completely get what it's like to live in the conditions that prompted these policy shifts in the first place.
Yeah.
What do you think about the current state of affairs with the drug war?
I think it's ineffective and anti-poor. I don't think it's really the solution we need for drugs.
What would you do differently?
I think we should focus more on the rehabilitation and see drug as a disease instead of seeing it as a crime.
Okay. What about martial law down in Mindanao? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the extension was uncalled for, and I don't think they really need martial law to fix the problems in Marawi.
What kind of problems do you think martial law will bring?
I think it would open up Pandora's box actually, because if they can declare martial law for a very long time in Mindanao, what's stopping Duterte from declaring it for the whole country?
I think there's a lot of things wrong with it. Basically, there's too much collateral damage.
Okay. How would you do it more effectively?
I think do the legal process.
Okay, what about martial law down in Mindanao? Do you have any thoughts on that?
They could do the same things without declaring martial law.
What do you think the damage of declaring martial law is?
Other than the preconceived notion of the martial law from the Marcos days, it's like things like it's easily abusable.
Although President Duterte is, very vigilant and he wants abrupt change in the government and in the Philippines, I believe that the drug war is not it's not actually a good idea, especially that the previous drug wars in across the world did not actually do anything, did not have any positive changes. I believe that that the drug war won't help. Actually, it would only make matters worse here in the Philippines because the police or the people involved, they actually target the drug victims instead of the actual drug lords, which Duterte really wants. However, he fails to actually accomplish this drug war.
What would you do differently?
Well, first of all, rehabilitation is, I believe, is one of the best options. These drug addicts could be rehabilitated because I think that these drug addicts, they need to be helped. They don't need to be apprehended by the government. The biggest problem with martial law is the direct power of the army and the police in the current situation. They have suspended the writ of habeas corpus as what usually happens in the martial law, and I think that this is an abuse in power, especially for the police and the army soldiers.
What are your current thoughts on how the Philippines is handling the drug war?
In my opinion, I don't think it's a good approach in handling the drug wars because a lot of people are getting killed. If they say that this person is using drugs and such, and then they don't even have proof, then they just kill him or something like that.
What are your thoughts about how the government's approaching the drug war right now?
There's been a lot of news about how President Duterte is handling the drug war in the Philippines. There are lots of news regarding killings. Personally, I am against killing, basically, because it's human life. Regardless of a person's sins or crimes, no one has the right to take someone else's life. I think it's not really that fair to be against martial law just because of a previous reign of Marcos. I understand the risks of martial law na sometimes it's not really democracy per se, but then I think it's necessary for this one. Kasi people, it's harder to fight when you're, dispersed, when you're separated,
Right.
compared to having this martial law.
As I said before, everything about my Western sensibilities says extrajudicial killings are wrong. I attempted to schedule an interview with the police chief of Manila, but he declined. I spoke to one high-ranking police official who asked not to be named, and he told me there are no extrajudicial killings and that everything can be chalked up to vigilante justice and it is not condoned. How convenient. I think what surprised me the most was just how okay a good portion of the population was with the killings. I'm sure it's different when it's your family member getting shot in the face because of a drug addiction, but it goes to show that day-to-day life must have been bad enough that people are now willing to accept an entirely new standard of justice to address this situation. However, there is hope. This is Quezon City. It's the most populous city in the Manila metro area. By Philippine standards, it's a progressive city that pushes the boundaries on many social and policy issues. We're here at the Quezon City City Hall where we're going to speak to Vice Mayor Joy Belmonte. She's going to tell us about her approach to the drug war and some of the other issues that we've been talking about. Joy Belmonte is someone who I grew to respect greatly the more I learned about her. She's in a difficult situation politically because you can tell she has to walk the fine line between executing her vision and supporting an administration that counters that vision on a regular basis. Vice Mayor, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. How is the portrayal that the Western media has different than what's actually going on the ground right now in the Quezon City, Manila metro area?
Well, I really wouldn't say that it's not accurate as well because, there are cases of extrajudicial killings. They're not really state-sponsored, but they're a result of the drug war wherein, the syndicates are operating against their assets.
Okay.
So as not to implicate the heads, the drug lords, the drug protectors, etc. That's how I see it. No? So it's not always about the cops. A lot of it is also done by the cops, obviously, because the police are also involved in the extrajudicial killings, and I'm just being honest. No? And I say this because I've headed this office, the Quezon City Anti-Drug Abuse and Advisory Council, since I was elected in 2010. And our office has 3 mandates. So it's usually prevention, treatment and rehabilitation, and establishing linkages with the communities. The law enforcement side is done by the police. So I coordinate a lot with them. We coordinate a lot with the police. And then when this administration took over and the thrust was on the war on drugs, we found out that a lot of the policemen that we had been working with, who are actually part of the DAID, what's DAID? The District Anti-Illegal Drugs Department, who I work closely with, were actually ninja cops. So these are
explain
cops.
that phrase.
Yeah, ninja cops are cops that when they catch a stash of shabu or drugs, they resell most of it. Maybe the Western portrayal is one-dimensional. It just focuses on the participation of the police, maybe, or of the deaths, or of the state not doing much about investigating these deaths, or the lack of human rights thrusts here. But really, the issue is just so complicated because there are so many personalities involved. From the drug lords, the drug coddlers, the drug protectors, from the assets, from the small-time pushers who are really just pushing because they're extreme poverty that they are undergoing. Like, for example, in our women's correctional, which I take care of a lot because I'm a women's rights advocate, maybe 85% of the women are confined because of poverty, because they had been selling drugs on the streets. They always say that the war on drugs is anti-poor. It's because since they are the ones that maybe the higher ups give the drugs to distribute them on the ground, they're the ones also that are killed to prevent them from talking. The Western portrayal, I think, is one-dimensional. It doesn't tackle all the intricacies and the complexities involved in this whole campaign against drugs.
A lot of people seem to be willing to accept some of these measures. Do you find that?
Yeah, I find it a little disturbing because I We come from the human rights offices here in Quezon City. Quezon City has been known to be very progressive. Here, we always say, we're not afraid to say that we support the president's campaign against drugs, but we want to do it our way. So we don't, whenever I go to the communities, I never stress that people deserve to die or people deserve whatever their just desserts are. I always say that our thrust in Quezon City is treatment and rehabilitation. For example, we're the only LGU with our own, or at least here in the NCR region, with our own LGU-funded treatment and rehabilitation center.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we started with 150 beds, but when the campaign started, we wanted to support it, and now we've increased to 300 beds.
Are you having problems filling those up?
And we are actually, because
Really?
we realize, there is this concept or this misperception that, your treatment and rehab center must be full and then, brimming with people, and it's like a jail. Actually, it isn't. It's like a hospital, right? And you have to be very
As it should be.
strict that your bed space, which is 300, does not exceed that, because otherwise your services will be sacrificed and they won't get well.
The president has recently gone on record by making the link of the Islamic State uprising being funded by drugs, which you can make that argument, but if you make that link directly and the Islamic State is the cause of martial law, is there a fear amongst any of the leadership throughout the rest of the country that this martial law may expand and these tactics that a lot of people are not comfortable with can also expand with that?
President Duterte has this special charisma, this special talent of really earning the trust of the people. I noticed that. I don't know if you noticed that, but from the surveys themselves,
80%.
People are just very trustful of his intentions, very trustful that when he does something, it's really for the good of the country, And then even a dubious tool like martial law becomes something that is positive when President Duterte is the one that does it. That's what my perspective. A human life is a human life. A human life should be preserved as much as it can be. And a human life has because of the fact that it is alive, has that opportunity to change for the better and still have a good future if we in government support this life.
Ultimately, if I were a Philippine national, I'd completely support the angle she's taken when trying to solve this deeply rooted problem. It's as much of a social and medical problem as it is a criminal problem. This multi-pronged approach, if done in cooperation with law enforcement and other political entities, has a potential to provide a more compassionate solution to a problem that, at its root, is a human problem. Look, maybe I sound a little bit too bleeding heart for this. Maybe I don't fully get just how bad it is when meth slithers its way into a neighborhood. I can't pretend to understand what it's like to see the neighbor's kid go from being an upstanding student to an addict willing to rob your wife on her way to the store to get more money for crank. I really hope other areas of the Philippines follow the example put forth by Quezon City. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it seems to me like it's a step in the right direction. Ultimately, the Philippines is dealing with some difficult things right now. You got the Islamic State, a crippling meth problem, and walking the tightrope of swift justice versus authoritarian policy. Even though the Philippines is a vastly complicated situation and something that may be hard for Westerners to see from the same perspective, I see in the Philippines a tale of hope. Although a lot of these hardliner policies cause pain to those directly affected, they seem to all be coming from at least a partial perspective of wanting to improve the country. Do I agree with how everything is done? Absolutely not. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a population pool of 100 million plus other people who can't take the reins at some point in the future to find the right solution for the Philippines. I mean, come on. They even got the Pac-Man as a senator now. They can't lose. 100% don't ask his opinion about gay people. Ugh. But yeah, Pac-Man! With enough time and the correct people moving the ball forward, the Philippines has the potential to improve itself socially, economically, and with regard to its influence over foreign policy in the region. I have a feeling I'll be returning to the Philippines many times in the future. I found in it a place with amazing and welcoming people, and a rich culture that is also a melting pot that gives even a place like New York City a run for its money. As I'm producing this video, the situation is still unfolding and details are still surfacing. In fact, as of December 13th, 2017, President Duterte has extended martial law on the island of Mindanao throughout the entire year of 2018. Since filming this,
President Duterte's son Paulo, who's the current vice mayor of Davao City, was implicated in a scandal involving facilitating the illegal import of over $100 million worth of the very drug his father is trying to eliminate from China. On December 25th of 2017, he was forced to resign from office. I sincerely hope the problems they face right now at the time of filming this are no longer problems 5 or 10 years down the road. When you wind up loving a place, you want to see it succeed, and I found a place and a people that I truly love and appreciate. I learned so much during this experience, and I'm very thankful that I had the opportunity in my life to make it happen. Thank you to everyone who made this experience possible. So to close this out, let's just realize that the Philippines, much like all of us as individuals, and our communities, and our countries, are all works in progress. Nothing's perfect. All you can do is focus on the good and try to make it better. I hope everyone enjoyed this and learned something. I hope you all got a perspective that's a little different than the way the news tries to frame things in short segments that are often sensationalized. And with that, my name is Doug Vossen. Keep an open mind and be good to one another.